culture eats strategy for breakfast, which is one of my favorite ways of looking at it, is that you cannot really disconnect the leadership component from the strategic change question on any level in an organization. So what we try to do is to bring those two together. And most of the time it starts with the question of...
Daria Ofman is a partner and process designer, facilitator and changemaker at Better Future, and former executive manager at MCSBE. With a background in law and leadership strategy, she helps teams navigate complexity, ask better questions, and turn uncertainty into meaningful action. She specializes in guiding mission-driven leaders through change with clarity, depth, and purpose.
We need more designers in the leadership space.
As in product designers?
Product designers, social designers that understand that processes have a shape and that there are principles behind it, and that you don't just organize a program based on what you think is cool, but that there is an idea behind it which works better than other things. That's the technical side, and then the being part of it is being in that as present as possible so that you can prepare and let go in the moment and adjust.
The design enables that to happen. It's formative from that point of view.
100%. Yeah, exactly. And that's what we do in the art of facilitating.
Hi, Daria. Welcome to The Power Between.
Hey, Roddy. Very nice to be here.
It's great to have you on, Daria. We met not that long ago, the end of, I think it was December even last year, 2025, at a leadership conference in St Andrews at the University of St Andrews, my old alma mater. And you made a presentation there with Jonathan Gosling, a great name in leadership that I shouldn't be stumbling over like that. And it was sort of around Arendtian action, and I'd like to explore a little bit of that. But really, your background, you're a partner at Better Future, a Dutch-based social impact consulting firm, and you look at that sort of what happens in organizations at that sort of intersection of systemic change, strategy, and organizational psychology and leadership. All the themes we love to talk about here. So, but your big focus is around facilitative leadership. So I'm really, really pleased to have some time to explore lots of different angles with you here. But perhaps, as always, I like to get the guest to say a little bit in your own words about how you came to be interested in this and how you came to be working in this area.
Well, it's again, it's very nice to hear that what we're doing is resonating with your work. I think I've entered the leadership space since a very long time. I've been interested in the fascinating way in which human beings manage to organize themselves, basically since I can remember to think. And I've been working globally. I've been professionally raised in the Middle East, where I lived in Egypt for over 8 years, helping organizations transition from a non-profit model to a for-profit model, with the intention of doing that with integrity, which isn't always easy. Since 7 years, I returned to the Netherlands, where I'm originally from. And since then, I joined Better Future, and we've been, I've been in the great privilege of working with some of the most innovative companies, I think, worldwide, that are trying to take responsibility within their value chain or within their services for a better world in some shape or form. Can be on very specific sustainability issues, can also be around social justice topics, can be around the solar transition. It's a pretty broad spectrum. I always say that we're sector agnostic, but we're not leader agnostic, because we work primarily not for brands, but for people. Because nothing is innovative in any organization except human beings that know why they're doing what they're doing. And I'm sure you are very aware of that. So yeah, we work for
but it's great always to shine the light on that, because without people, organizations have no energy, have no and as you say, have no innovative capacity. And yet lots of organizations are very good at building structures that prevent that human energy, that human innovative capacity to thrive and flourish. So, I mean, I think that's really where you prepare the ground to allow that to happen.
Yes, like humans are very good at taking the human out of systems, although I think that's a massive misconception, also absolutely untrue, of how reality works in business.
But it's interesting. So, I mean, obviously the companies that you are working with are pretty purposeful. If you're in solar, or if you're in some sort of social enterprise role, then these are things that get you out of bed in the morning and make you want to go to work. And they'll tend to be relatively small, I'm guessing. I mean, in as much as they're not huge multinational organizations.
Well, I think that what we focus on is organizations that are like large SMEs. So the smallest of the largest. I think that's where a lot of the tilting capacity is. And that's, I mean, if we're real, SMEs are a little bit depending on the country in Europe, like the vast majority of our economies. I think sometimes we tend to focus too much on corporates, but when it comes to employment, when it comes to innovative capacity, uh, SMEs is where a large, part of the work happens. And it's wonderful to work with them. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely on board with that. The size of the organization is always relevant, really, and if it's of a size where you can understand the purpose behind it and the direction it's going, and be within touch of the senior leadership, I think that all makes a big difference. But also, even if you are a large SME, or just sort of breaching into a corporate size space, but not a huge corporate, you still have some of that agility to change direction, change focus, which
Yeah, for sure.
in big organizations, I think they have to put in so many processes and structures that becomes, that as a juggernaut, that they're much more difficult to adapt and change. So I completely see why that's an exciting space to be in. In terms of the people and the leadership within them, it's also at a really interesting crossroads, though, presumably, because in small organizations where everyone, we're talking 50 or so people, or even up to 150 people, everyone probably knows everyone, at least who everyone is in the organization, and has an idea of what they do. But once you get beyond those sizes, the silos appear, and and it gets more difficult. So is that where you're operating? Is that the kind of...
I think we're mainly in a little bit larger, like starting from a couple hundred to a couple thousand, like up to 10,000, because that's where the kind of the classic scaling questions on how do you organize systems that are liberating or that stay agile, or how do you organize a learning system in a large organization, and yeah, make sure that knowledge finds its place to the right spaces. How do you innovate but not become too technocratic or bureaucratic?
Yeah. Well, and those are the challenges that appear once you get into that size.
Yeah, and how do you stay connected to the ground reason of why you exist in the first place? And how do you infuse that energy and keep that alive in organizations? I find that a very necessary question, because, there was a start of why an organization was founded in the first place. And that's often a very legitimate reason. And how can you stay in touch with that and not become complacent or too overly organized, so that you lose that? Because that's what gives purpose to the organization, and also, yeah, allows people to ask more ethical questions, on not only, we always ask people, it's easy to ask yourself, are we doing the right things? Or sorry, it's easier to ask, are we doing things right? But it's very hard to ask, are we doing the right things? And those are essential questions to keep asking.
I mean, this is where Hannah Arendt came in, who was a German political theorist of the 20th century, pretty much. She was born at the beginning of the 20th century, I think. And she sort of concerned herself with how humans work successfully together. I mean, often through a political lens more than an organizational one, but nonetheless, her reflections around leadership, I think, are really interesting. And one of her core ideas is this idea as action as the highest human capacity. And I think that's something that many organizations now struggle with, isn't it? That it's it's our ability to act, to have agency, that it makes us really human. And I think this becomes even more interesting now that we're entering into a world of AI, but that's possibly another conversation. But lots of people within organizations, and certainly as organizations grow, I think people feel that they lose some of that agency, that ability to act,
Yes. Or they think they lose it.
or they think they lose it. So yeah, so explore that, explain that a little bit further. The sort of the, the difference between the what people fear perhaps and what other people in the organization wish of them. There's a tension there, isn't there?
Yeah, I think for those that are not very familiar with her work, it's very vast. But the main thing that I think that we connected on and that I focus on is her more existential distinction between different types of human activity. You have labor, which is the thing we all have to do every day. Clean our house, work the land, do things that we have to do anyway in order to sustain ourselves. Work, which is anything that is world building, like usually most of the thing we do in a work context, which is more of a linear thing. We build services, we build our product line, and therefore we increase it. But then there's a very different type of activity, which is what she calls action. And that is, a child falls into the water, you jump after it and you rescue the child. That's neither labor nor work. That is action. You choose to act upon that and save the child. But it's also, a colleague makes an inappropriate or racist comment and you decide to speak out. Or there is a decision that is made in your management team that you feel is disadvantaging a person. And okay, maybe you might not become popular by voicing that, but you decide to act upon that situation and speak out. Those are what she calls action. It's a deliberate choice to intervene and do something that is not necessarily asked of you, but that is, in your perspective, the right thing to do at the moment. So that's the kind of the distinction, and it's very important to stay in touch with, how do I want to execute my action? What does that mean for me as a human being, but also what does it mean for me as a leader to do that? And but then I don't know how far you want to take this, because
No, I think it's great because I mean those are questions that lots of people internally are challenged with, or asking themselves about how much action, how much of me can I do in the workspace. And I think that particularly applies to people in the middle of organizations who are always looking up to see what those more senior executives above them are doing and how that would be viewed, and also trying to work out how it would be taken by those people who report to them. That middle layer, that ability to have action is really vulnerable. It's a fragile thing.
I think it's fragile everywhere. And the more you'll go up in an organization, the more things might get political in a different way, which is maybe equally, difficult to act. But I think it looks different in different layers, because as a middle, like in the middle layer of an organization, there is a large element of building trust with your seniors, so that you get the space to act and have agency with your team or with whoever you're managing. And there is more of an operational action space. But there is also, you're closer to the fire, you're closer to where the work takes place, you're closer to human lives, you're closer to the political and the strategic, but also to the thing that matters to the humans that you're working with, which is, I think, equally important, and if not more important, to actually showing who you are and who you want to be and what type of company you want to be.
And I think it's absolutely that tension. So as a leader, you want to be showing your personality around that, and that's a way of building connection and building followership, I think. But as a subordinate reporting into senior leaders, there is always going to be a slight fear, a slight reticence about showing that off too much, because you want to be seen to be following the corporate line. And I think the challenge, the leadership challenge, I say this lots, is, our definition of leadership is about people who create the conditions for others to do their best work. And I think that's really what we're looking at here, isn't it? It's about creating the conditions so that people feel they have that agency.
And exactly that is, I think, what takes us into, what we spoke about is facilitative leadership. The ability to create space for others to do better and not know better yourself, but ask better questions. Become better at creating the container so that others can thrive. Yeah, just checking,
When you go into organizations, you do some sort of, I don't know whether it's a sort of official technical type of audit, or you just observe and you see how it works and whether those kind of behaviors and conditions exist?
It depends on what question they come with. So sometimes I would say that companies knock on the door with two very specific questions. Either they ask for a leadership program, which could be for different levels, from board level to senior management, sometimes even more like junior onboarding, but also sometimes that's a bit of a mixed program. Or, and that happens more frequently for change programs where leadership and behavior is an essential element. Because we all know the quote, culture eats strategy for breakfast, which is one of my favorite ways of looking at it, is that you cannot really disconnect the leadership component from the strategic change question on any level in an organization. So what we try to do is to bring those two together. And most of the time it starts with the question of there's a shift happening and we need to become future ready to make that shift practical. Either we need guidelines or handholding on how to make this strategy really carried by everybody or gain input from all levels to make that a collective story. Or it is we already have some direction, but how do we make sure that it connects with the work on all levels?
And that plays to this idea that you have around the difference between change and transition. And again, there's different perspectives on that. You mentioned this before. Where do you think the issue arises between a misunderstanding between those two words?
Well, we often speak about change, but change can be something that is immediate. There's a massive data leak and we have to deal with it. Or, well, very current situation, there's another import tariff that we have to manage the consequences of. That's a change that is, transitions are more gradual and they happen over time, like the energy transition that we're in. Which is it's not only an execution question or an operational question, it's about meaning making. It's about culture and behavior. It's much more long term, and it's not, you cannot just impose a transition. You have to enable it. It's also something that cannot be coming from the top necessarily, or actually it rarely is. It's often more of a gradual bottom up process that at some point becomes inevitable. And in order to guide that, a lot of the traditional top-down leadership, it doesn't work. It needs to be a facilitative process. And that's why I think, especially for middle management, but I think in general, it's very important that leaders have the ability to facilitate their teams as part of their toolkit available, especially when you are in a shifting market or in a shifting organization, which at the moment, a lot of us are.
So, going back to, let me reframe my earlier question, which is, when you go into these organizations, slightly regardless of whether you've been asked to come and do a program or a transformation project, can you tell that, is it obvious to see where they are with that level of ability in facilitating and understanding and creating the conditions? I mean, is it something that sort of it is pretty apparent, or does it only emerge once you dig into the weeds?
I think a bit of both. And it's usually a mixed bag because the people that ask the question are often quite evolved in the sense that they know that they don't know.
Okay.
And they might not know exactly what they're looking for, but they have a genuine question, which is a beautiful place to start. And there's humility there, and there is, a genuine ask. When you see that, when you can have this human conversation on what's really happening here, that's usually all you need to know to start. However, that sounds very easy. It's very rarely the case that immediately from the start is happening because of the politics, because it's also kind of a trust building process. You have to understand, who are you, what can you offer, and that takes a bit of time. Sometimes in the phrasing of even an invitational email, you're already noticing, oh wow, we speak the same language, which is a great starting point. And very often, to be honest, it's one person in a management team that completely gets it, and then a couple are on a different trail. And the first step is to create alignment there before you can work. And that is part of the work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes lots of sense. And I suspect lots of people listening feel that resonate loudly, that until you have that alignment, it's very difficult to create the change. So it's going to be easier. That doesn't mean it's easy, but it's going to be easier for you as an outsider being tasked with coming in to create some change than it is for people who are in the organization to enable that change themselves. But nonetheless, what do you do when you go in to start creating that alignment? Because I think that's that's the critical step, isn't it? It is to open people's eyes and start to draw them together.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it depends very much on, again, where your entry point is. But one of the principles that for us is really kind of, we never make compromises on that, is to work with a very good internal design team. So have a couple of people from different layers in the organization that can help to navigate this space, that are your mission partners in this process, because there's never alignment in any team, and that is creating even a shared language. I mean, let alone we're all sharing one actual language, doesn't mean that we understand each other. So you need that internal, those eyes and ears, and that know the organizational history, that know which words are contaminated, that know, all the things that have been tried before, that know the where the organizational cynicism is, that know where the pain is, that know where the opportunities are. You need these people to, to design a process, and then, to be honest, come in with a lot of love, because there's always pain in teams from people that have given a lot and haven't been heard.
And that, so then looking towards the facilitative leadership, that's a skill that some people apply relatively naturally, and other people have to really work quite hard at doing. So where does one start again with that? Is it because I think once people are into the habit of it, then it becomes easier, but it's creating those habits, isn't it?
Yeah, and on a programmatic level, what that looks like is, for us, we try to be as lazy as possible, to make the team work from the beginning as much as possible. So, super practical. Make sure that we are not the ones taking notes, that we're not the ones summarizing the conversation. Of course, we do take notes, but to put ownership immediately there where it should be. And in a program, we are not the one that are facilitating the check-in and the check-out, and some of the parts of the program they are facilitating, and we always go meta. So we do something, or the group does something, we zoom out and we look at, okay, what's happening here? And then we continue. So we usually fade out in a process. In the beginning, we are quite present, and then we design a process with the organization to fade out, so that within a time frame of, well, if it's a year, the first 6 months we're very present, and then we fade out in the second part of the 6 months. And then we only guide on the meta level. Okay, what happened in that meeting? How could you have put ownership more with that group? How is your lazy facilitation going? I saw that you were working very hard. What could you do to lean back? Because when you are working hard, the rest is not. So, and then it becomes much more of a guidance, but it's really about how to make yourself as an external party as unnecessary as possible. And it's interesting how much work that takes.
Yeah, no, I think that, I mean, that's brilliant. I naturally love the idea of bringing laziness in as a positive capacity. But I think you're right. I mean, if you're carrying all the load yourself, then others are just being sort of trucking along behind, and it's that unloading of responsibility to others that, in fact, is quite purposeful and energizing for people, because they feel that they've got a reason to be there.
Yeah, you're right. It's really key that that responsibility is also really with people, that it's not just for show, but that it's not a facade, but that they are mandated to take those decisions. And that's a process. You cannot just start with that. It really does require, it's an emancipation process. But you get a lot of back from it. But it doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen in 2 months.
I mean, it's interesting. And maybe it's sort of broadly philosophical a question, but where do you think that fear, of participating, of taking the lead, of doing those tasks and just leaving it to others stems from? Because I don't think it's our natural state, but yet we become very used to, or it's more comfortable to let someone else take the responsibility, I suppose, in those organizational settings. Where do you think we've got that from? I mean, I noticed you've got this wonderful personal manifesto on your LinkedIn, at the top of your LinkedIn, which people can go and have a look at. But it starts off with, although I'm a fast person, my desire is to slow down and see what happens when asking better questions. And that really gets absolutely to the core of what we're saying here. So there is an urge for people to look active, but there's something there about us not wanting to take the lead or create the disturbance. How does that occur, do you think?
Well, it's nice that you picked that out, but there's something very innate to humans, that we, for some reason, underappreciate slowing down, because we feel that we have this need to be doing things on the surface, even when they make absolutely no sense. So there's this appreciation for fastness and for doing, but whereas there is such incredible power in the being and in just being present with what's unfolding, which is very active, actually. It's not inactive at all. There's in Taoism this beautiful distinction between the difference between doing nothing and not doing. And not doing is incredibly active. And I think that's what we're talking about, right? Like, that's the type of paying radical attention to what's unfolding. I think that's what you were resonating with. Is that right?
Well, I think so. Yeah, absolutely. And this, well, I mean, there's so much just in that short line, but I mean, part of it is the sort of Daniel Kahneman thinking fast and slow, or McGilchrist's sort of the master and his emissary, left brain, right brain, which is all connected together. But also there is part of it which, and that's about ourselves, the individual, but also there's about creating that space for others to do that in. And I think that's what that the last part of that little phrase I read out, which is see what happens when asking better questions. So if you're asking questions of people, and a better question is not asking them to do something, it's probably asking them why they think this has happened, or what has led to this circumstance. So they've got to understand the context, and then it's a coaching question, basically, isn't it?
Yeah, it's any question that puts reflection and ownership on the other person, or that you guide them to go inside themselves.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And in your definition of facilitative leadership, does that sits at the core of it? Does that mean that's a significant part of it?
That is a significant part on the being side. And on the doing side, there's also a lot about understanding how processes work. That has a technical side of, like, how do you design processes for ownership. And if you speak to designers, that they will really understand what that requires. And I sometimes feel like we need more designers in the leadership space, because they have a very
As in product designers.
product designers, social designers, that understand that processes need to, that they have a shape, and that there are principles behind it, and that you don't just organize a program based on what you think is cool, but that there's an idea behind it, which works better than other things. That's the technical side. And then the being part of it is being in that as present as possible, so that you can prepare and let go in the moment and adjust. But it's important that you prepare so that you can let go in the process. And then what you're saying becomes super relevant, because then the quality of the presence is much more important than the agenda or the program that you designed. But that doesn't mean that the design wasn't essential in the first place.
Right. The design enables that to happen. It's sort of formative from that point of view.
100%. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's what we do in the art of facilitating, is taking people through.
Yeah, but it's also about giving people the courage to do that too, the permission to do that, I think, isn't it? And I'm wondering, if you're mid-level leader in an organization, and you feel you understand all this, but there needs to be a catalyst or a trigger to enable you to go and do it, I think, doesn't it? And obviously, if an organization such as Better Future comes in and shakes it up a bit, then that creates those moments. But do you have any advice for people about how they can initiate it themselves, or is it just about perhaps reading around the subject and gaining confidence to give it a try?
I think it's very important to have thought allies. And they might not be the people in your direct team, but it's about creating the space for yourself and the courage to try something new. And that is very, very hard for somebody to do alone. No matter how good somebody is or how many educations or trainings you followed. It is extremely, even systemically, almost, it's very hard to do that alone when you're in the middle. So creating allies or your tribe that can back you, and sometimes that, if you're lucky, that can be your direct manager if they can give you the space to do that. But if that's not the case, it's very hard to do. So I also just want to honor people that completely understand what is required, but still are stuck because they don't have this, they don't get the space to do that. And sometimes, no matter how equipped they are, they will not get it off the ground because the incentives in the system just make it close to impossible. And that is also real. And that's why we often work on different levels, because if we don't have the mandate from the top to create space for middle management, sometimes we can't succeed. And that's why we always need to enter on boardroom level. Not necessarily work with boardroom, but at least have sufficient backing so that space can be given. And sometimes that is in the space of some free budget or X amount of free time. It doesn't have to necessarily be complicated, but you need to have some free space to do this. But then again, I'm also listening to you on a practical note. When you are managing your own team, it's also sometimes about asking the questions to your team instead of thinking that you need to have the answers.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And that takes confidence and practice to do too, though, doesn't it? It's not easy because one feels that the leadership role, wrongly, I think, probably, but one feels that you ought to have the answers, whereas in fact you ought to have the courage to say, I don't know, let's find it out. What do you think? Because it is an exploration, isn't it? Doing these things. If you're going into a new environment, you need to be able to sense your way forward with it. It's not going to be clear.
And what are for you sources of confidence in that? If you put yourself in that position for you, Roddy, like what would you sources of confidence?
Oh, you put me on the spot. Well, I'm naturally curious about everything, which is why I love doing this job. But it so I think there's always a lot of conversation to be had, trying to understand what other people who have been into a similar, but maybe not exactly the same environment or situation have done, and then you try and work it back. But it's also so that gives you confidence that, I mean, a lot of it is about knowing you're not the only person facing this issue, I suppose. And I mean, in a way, the leadership community that we run gives a chance to do that. So we bring people together from different organizations who can explore some of the challenges and issues that they face. It's remarkable how often they get confidence from that because other people are facing the same issues. And if you know that same issue is emerging, then it gives you the confidence to challenge it rather than thinking this is just something I haven't worked out how to unlock because I don't have the right key.
Yeah, that sounds very recognizable. I mean, intervision and really freely speaking with people about dilemmas that you're facing. It helps with understanding you're not crazy. But it also sometimes I see that it becomes unpersonal because it's not about you. It's about what your role is facing in the system. And that sometimes can be a very compassionate way of looking at it. Or the compassion of that sometimes makes it lighter. It doesn't solve the problem, but it just makes it lighter.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of security achieved by having a group of you together, understanding that issue. I mean, you also work in lots of different cultures. When you work across Europe, which is broadly similar kinds of cultures, but I mean there'll be yeah, but yeah, what occurs in the UK is going to be different to that in Spain, to that in Germany. But also then your work, you work a good amount in Egypt. I think. Do you see the ability to sort of manage this sort of facilitative um, challenge being different in these cultures?
I mean, basic human dynamics, I think, are not very different. What we're incentivized by is not very different. We all have the same fears and hopes and dreams and all that. But how hierarchical a certain culture is, or how what they perceive as leadership or authority, of course, is culturally different. So, like, one of the reasons why it's relatively easy to work with facilitative leadership in the Netherlands is because in many areas, the Netherlands is a very non-hierarchical culture, even much more than the UK, even much more than Germany, much more than Belgium, even. And in Egypt or most of the Middle East, that's a very different story. And also, it depends if you're working in a young team, which I often do, where there's a lot of young people that have lived through the revolution, and although that hasn't really worked out, the spirit of that is imprinted on this generation, and you can have very different conversations. And I see, especially in like smaller companies, very strong, like facilitatively strong teams that manage to break through some of the cultural hierarchical tendencies and manage that amongst each other very differently. Maybe also even as a radical resistance to the culture, because they're so confronted with how it's done outside that they choose consciously to do it differently. So there's also that.
Yeah. Do you think that generational difference is more similar across all the different cultures? Is it well?
I don't know how this happens. I'm not a sociologist, but I see it everywhere in the world.
You
Even,
do. Interesting.
yeah, I work in Vietnam a lot. I see it there. I work in Ghana. I see it there. It's really fascinating how but the generational gap, let's say in Western Europe, is smaller than what I see in a lot of African countries. There, it's a Grand Canyon sometimes.
But is there a sort of greater desire to change the process?
I think there's less vested interest in, or there's less to lose in changing it. Um, and yeah, and there's more mental flexibility to do so. Yeah, I would say so.
Sorry. There is more mental flexibility.
I would say so. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah. But also the idea of, like, the type of qualities we attribute to different ages. The respecting elders is a big deal, which is a beautiful quality. And yet some cultures rigidify that into whenever you are elder, or you have more to say, which I think is not a very productive way of looking at it, which creates a stagnant conversation, because then there's no mutual listening anymore. And there is cultural difference there that makes it, in some contexts, yeah, they're just different challenges.
I think I mean, you've touched a hot topic with me on mentioning elders, because I'm a great believer in thinking that Western developed organizations have a need and a role for the equivalent of elders in sort of traditional indigenous societies, people who can do a lot of this facilitative leadership. They aren't necessarily the bosses, but they've seen a lot of stuff and they understand that those human dynamics, and they can be supportive, and they can offer guide rails and advice without necessarily competing with people coming through. But you absolutely highlight the challenge is that they can also, create everything in aspects, so it doesn't change, and change is needed. So it's a like all these things, it's a tricky balance. But I think in the West we've lost a lot of that ability. So it's interesting that you do see it still in those, in whether it's Ghana, Egypt, or Vietnam, which are obviously very different places.
It's you're touching upon this because I think we're really really inadequate at understanding the quality of generational difference here from a different, I mean, we're really bad at it. So I think I understand what you're saying, and that's a massive loss. And the what I love in certain cultures is the ability to have this eldership more prominently as a part of the culture and part of the way that, people go to elders for advice. The flip, there's also flip sides to that, but okay. Um, and there's this metaphor that in some organizations we get right and in some we don't, which is this idea of, when a group of people is building a boat, and I think this is an indigenous story. You have the younger generation that is cutting wood and yeah, building boats and uh, moving planks, and then you have the middle generation that has the map and they are coordinating and they are managing this, the builders, so to say. And then you have the elders that are sitting around the fire and remembering why they're building the boat in the first place. And and that's a different, and it doesn't have necessarily to do with age, but it's about the energy of, like, what is your building energy? Are you the one remembering why you're building the boat? Are you the coordinator, or are you the one that is shifting wood? And can we be explicit about that difference so that we can honor the necessity of that difference? And some cultures just really don't get this and don't get it right. And that goes for countries and it goes for companies.
I love that story, and it sort of plays partly, not perfectly, but to those elements that you identified right at the beginning of our conversation about labor, work, and action. You can see the connections there. But I think having people, and my point is that elders don't actually need to be old. They just need to have experience and that ability to see the system. Your parable of them sitting around the fire, they're seeing the system and they're explaining why this action is required in order to enable the system to operate. And that then gives everybody purpose. We need to work harder at trying to bring elders into organizations. That can be in Europe anyway, and see how that works.
Well, that's why we need each other, need to learn from each other and visit other companies and cultures with a serious curiosity that there is value and different ways of seeing that have a right in and of themselves that we might not have.
I think we see, in family organizations, and I suspect, if you're working in Germany and wherever with sort of reasonably large sized Mittelstand family businesses, there is that elder connection that goes through it. Whereas in big publicly owned organizations, you lose that continuity of stewardship. I think that's often where they can go off the rails.
Beautiful word, stewardship.
Well, on that, we're out of time, but these conversations always rattle too fast. But it's been great speaking with you and exploring some of that. People can find out presumably more about you. We'll put it into the show notes on LinkedIn and at Better Future. But Daria Ofman, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for having me, Roddy. And good luck with the great work you're doing.
Thank you.